Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching the stars shift and bend around them as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel. This was it, the moment humanity had dreamed of for centuries. First contact with an alien civilization. "We're receiving a signal, Captain," said Communications Officer Lisa Bennett. Her voice carried a mix of excitement and nervousness that Jake felt too. "It's coming from the large ship directly ahead." Jake looked at the massive vessel hanging in space before them. The Zephyrian ship was 3 times the size of the Liberty, its hull gleaming silver under the light of the nearby star. Strange symbols covered its surface, and Jake could see smaller ships moving around it like busy worker bees. "Put them through," Jake ordered. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at an alien face. The being had pale blue skin, large dark eyes, and what looked like small gills on the sides of its neck. When it spoke, the universal translator converted its words into English. "Greetings, humans of Earth. I am High Commander Vextal of the Zephyrian Empire. We have been waiting for your arrival." Jake stepped forward. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison. We come in peace, hoping to establish friendly relations with your people." Vextal's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "Peace. Yes, we value peace above all things. The Zephyrian Empire has brought peace and order to 47 star systems. We would be honored to share our knowledge with humanity." Over. The next few hours, Jake and his crew were invited aboard the Zephyrian flagship. The alien ship was incredible. The walls seemed to glow with their own light, and the technology was far beyond anything humans had developed. Vextal led them through corridors filled with other aliens, all different species working together. The Galactic Trade Consortium includes over 200 species, Vextal explained as they walked. Each brings their own skills and knowledge. Together, we have created a golden age of prosperity and peace. Lisa Bennett stayed close to Jake, her trained eye taking in every detail. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. The aliens seemed friendly enough, but there was something in their eyes when they looked at the humans, something that reminded her of how a cat looked at a mouse. They were taken to a great hall where dozens of alien species mingled and talked. Jake was amazed at the diversity. There were beings that looked like walking trees, others that seemed to be made of crystal, and some that floated in the air without any visible means of support. "This is wonderful," Jake said to Vextal. "Humanity would be honored to join your consortium." "Of course," Vextal replied. "But first, there are certain requirements. Your species must prove it is committed to peace. We have had unfortunate experiences with violent races in the past." Jake nodded. "We understand. Humans have had their share of conflicts, but we're ready to move beyond that." "Good. We will need to place monitoring stations in your solar system to ensure compliance with consortium peace accords, and your military forces will need to be restructured to meet our standards." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced at Jake and saw he was frowning slightly. These demands seemed reasonable on the surface, but they would effectively leave Earth defenseless. Later, when they returned to the Liberty, Lisa pulled Jake aside. "Captain, I need to show you something." In her quarters, Lisa activated her computer and displayed several files. "I've been analyzing the Zephyrian data, networks while we were on their ship. Look at this." The screen showed a star chart with dozens of systems marked in red. "These are the 47 systems Vextal mentioned, but look at the historical data I managed to access." Jake studied the information. Each red system showed the same pattern. First contact, peace negotiations, monitoring stations, military, restructuring. Then, within a few years, the original inhabitants were gone, replaced by Zephyrian colonies. "This could be a coincidence," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Look at this one," Lisa said, highlighting a particular system. "The Keth Ari." They were described as a peaceful species that loved art and music. The records say they became aggressive and attacked Zephyrian traders. The Empire was forced to intervene to protect innocent civilians. She pulled up another file. But I found this in their deep archives. Orders to stage the attack. Instructions on how to make it look like the Cathari were responsible. Jake stared at the screen, his face pale. How many? All of them, Captain. Every single species that joined the consortium. They were all framed for crimes they didn't commit, then eliminated or enslaved. Before Jake could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Lisa ran to her communication station and her face went white. Captain, we're receiving emergency broadcasts from Haven Prime. It's a colony world about 50 light years from here. They're under attack. The main screen showed chaos. Ships that looked like human vessels were firing on defenseless settlements. Civilians ran screaming as buildings exploded. The attackers showed no mercy, destroying everything in sight. Those aren't our ships, Jake said immediately. We don't have anything that looks like that. But even as he spoke, he could see the human markings on the attacking vessels. Earth symbols, human writing, everything that would identify them as ships from Earth. Sir, Lisa said, her voice shaking, I'm detecting Zephyrian energy signatures from those ships. They're using human hulls, but the weapons and engines are Zephyrian. Jake watched in horror as the massacre continued. Millions of innocent beings were dying, and it was being made to look like humanity was responsible. Get me a direct channel. To Vexatel, Jake ordered. When the alien appeared on screen, his expression was one of shocked sadness. Captain Morrison, we are receiving terrible reports. It appears human ships are attacking Haven Prime. Those aren't human ships, Jake said firmly. They're yours, disguised to look like ours. Vextal's eyes widened in what looked like genuine surprise. That is a very serious accusation, Captain. Do you have proof? Jake looked at Lisa, who shook, her head slightly. The evidence she had gathered might not be enough, and they both knew it. I understand you are upset, Vextal continued. This attack reflects poorly on your species. Perhaps there are radical elements in your military that you are not aware of. No, Jake said. This is a setup. You're framing us. I am sorry you feel that way, Captain Morrison, but the evidence speaks for itself. This is exactly the kind of aggressive behavior the consortium exists to prevent. The screen went dark. Jake stood in silence for a moment, then turned to his crew. Set course for Earth, maximum speed. We need to warn them what's coming. But even as the Liberty jumped back into faster-than-light travel, Jake knew they might already be too late. The Zephyrians had had centuries to perfect their system. First, they would isolate humanity, turn the galaxy against them. Then they would move in as peacekeepers to save the galaxy from the human threat. Lisa looked at her instruments and saw something that made her blood run cold. Zephyrian ships were already moving toward Earth's solar system from multiple directions. Not just a few ships, but entire fleets, Captain, she said quietly. They're not waiting. The attack on Haven Prime was just the beginning. Jake nodded grimly. Humanity was about to face its greatest challenge, and they didn't even know it yet. The Zephyrians had spent thousands of years perfecting their technique. They had destroyed 47 civilizations with the same tactics, but they had never faced humans before. As the Liberty raced toward Earth, Jake made a decision. If the Zephyrians wanted a war, they would get one. But it wouldn't be the easy conquest they expected. Humanity had one advantage the other species hadn't possessed. They knew what was coming. Admiral Peter Hayes sat in the emergency council chamber on Earth, watching the holographic display with growing anger. The attack on Haven Prime was being broadcast on every channel across the galaxy. The images were clear and damning. Ships bearing human markings had slaughtered millions of innocent aliens. This is impossible, said Dr. Aaron Blake, Earth's chief scientist. We don't have ships in that sector. Our farthest colony is barely 20 light-years from Earth. Ambassador Helen Carter stood at the center of the chamber, her face pale but determined. She had just returned from the emergency session of the Galactic Council, and the news was worse than anyone had expected. "They've branded us as war criminals," Helen said. 43 species have formally declared humanity a threat to galactic peace. The Zephyrians are leading a coalition to contain what they call the human menace. Admiral Hayes clenched his fists. "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That we had nothing to do with Haven Prime. That our entire fleet was in Sol system during the attack." Helen's voice was bitter. "They said we were lying. The evidence was too clear to deny." Dr. Blake activated his own display. "I've analyzed every frame of the attack footage. The ships look human, but the energy signatures are wrong. The weapons, the engine emissions, even the way they move through space. None of it matches our technology." "Can you prove it?" Helen asked. "I can prove it to anyone willing to listen. But that's the problem. No one wants to hear our side of the story." The chamber's communication system activated. "Admiral Hayes, we have incoming ships, multiple contacts dropping out of FTL at the edge of the system." Hayes activated the main display. Dozens of ships were appearing on the sensors, representing 6 different alien species. All of them had their weapons powered up. "Open a channel," Hayes ordered. The screen filled with the face of a reptilian alien. "This is Fleet Commander Sisithak of the Corvani Republic. By order of the Galactic Council, you will surrender all human military assets and submit to occupation immediately." "Like hell we will," Hayes replied. "We've done nothing wrong." "The evidence says otherwise, human. Your species has shown its true nature. You will comply or face the consequences." Hayes cut the transmission and turned to his staff. "All ships to battle stations. Activate planetary defense grid." "Sir," said Captain Frank Davis of the Earth Defense Force, "we're outnumbered, 5-1. Our ships are good, but theirs have been fighting in space for centuries." "Then we better be smarter than they are," Hayes said. The first battle lasted 6 hours. Human ships darted between the larger alien vessels like wolves attacking a herd of buffalo. Earth's pilots used every trick they knew, turning their smaller size and speed into advantages. When it was over, the alien fleet had retreated, but the cost was heavy. Earth had lost 8 ships and over 200 crew members. The aliens had lost more, but they could afford the losses better than humanity could. Over the next weeks, more attacks came. Economic sanctions cut off trade with human colonies. Several outer settlements were bombed by what the attackers claimed were peacekeeping missions. Dr. Blake worked around the clock in his laboratory, trying to find solid proof of the Zephyrian deception. His team analyzed every piece of wreckage from the alien ships they had destroyed, looking for clues. "The metal composition is wrong," said Dr. Susan Clark, Blake's assistant. "These ships claim to be Corvani, but the hull material matches Zephyrian construction techniques." Blake nodded. "They're not just coordinating the attack, they're supplying weapons and technology to make sure we look as bad as possible." Meanwhile, Helen Carter tried desperately to find someone who would listen to Earth's side of the story. She sent messages to every species in the galaxy, begging for a chance to present evidence of humanity's innocence. Most ignored her completely. A few sent back angry responses, calling her a liar and a warmonger. But one message was different. It came from a species called the Veltar, aquatic beings from a water world near the galactic rim. Their ambassador, Kethlan, agreed to meet with Helen in secret. "We have doubts about the official story," Kethlan said through the water-filled communication chamber. "The attack on Haven Prime was brutal, yes, but something about it felt staged." Helen leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "The attackers were too efficient, too organized. They hit exactly the right targets to cause maximum horror with minimum military value. It was designed to create outrage, not achieve strategic goals." Helen felt a spark of hope. "Will you help us?" Kethlan was quiet for a long moment. We cannot act openly. The Zephyrians have too much influence. But we can share information quietly. Others have questions too. It was a small victory, but Helen took what she could get. At least someone was willing to consider that humanity might be innocent. Back on Earth, the situation was getting worse. Food shipments from the outer colonies had stopped. The orbital manufacturing stations were running low on raw materials. People were scared and angry. Admiral Hayes called another emergency meeting. We need to face facts. We're at war whether we wanted it or not. The question is how we fight back. We can't win a direct confrontation, Captain Davis said. They have too many ships, too many allies. Then we don't fight directly, Hayes replied. We hit their supply lines, their communication networks. We make them pay for every system they try to take from us. Dr. Blake cleared his throat. Admiral, I think I found something. The attack ships from Haven Prime all had the same flaw in their disguise. The quantum resonance from their engines doesn't match human technology. If we can get this information to the right people... Who's going to believe us? Helen asked. We've already tried explaining the technical evidence. Maybe we don't explain it, Blake said. Maybe we show it. Over the following days, Blake's plan took shape. They would capture one of the disguised ships intact, strip away the human exterior, and broadcast the proof to the entire galaxy. The opportunity came when a small Zephyrian force attacked the mining colony on Titan. Instead of destroying the attackers, the human defense fleet used disruptor weapons to disable their engines and life support. When the boarding parties went through the captured ships, they found exactly what Blake had predicted. Under the human hull plating were Zephyrian systems. The weapons were Zephyrian. The computers contained Zephyrian military codes. We have them, Blake said excitedly. This is proof that can't be denied. But when they tried to broadcast their findings, they discovered the Zephyrians had been busy too. Communication relays throughout human space were being jammed. News networks were controlled by Zephyrian allies. The evidence was suppressed before it could reach most of the galaxy. Worse, the Zephyrians responded by escalating their attacks. They claimed humanity had committed more atrocities, always with perfectly timed evidence that made humans look guilty. Helen sat in her office, staring at the reports flooding in. 3 more human colonies had been destroyed. The attackers claimed they were defending themselves against human aggression. But Helen knew the truth. The Zephyrians were systematically wiping out human settlements while making it look like justified retaliation. Admiral Hayes appeared on her communication screen. Helen, we need to evacuate the outer colonies. We can't protect them all. If we pull back, it'll look like we're abandoning our own people to save ourselves, Helen replied. If we don't pull back, those people will die anyway. It was an impossible choice. Every option made humanity look worse in the eyes of the galaxy. The Zephyrians had planned this perfectly. Dr. Blake burst into Helen's office without knocking. I've been monitoring Zephyrian communications. They're not just jamming our signals. They're replacing them with fake broadcasts. What do you mean? They're sending out messages that look like they come from Earth, but they're actually Zephyrian propaganda. Fake human leaders talking about conquest and expansion, staged scenes of human brutality. They're rewriting the story in real time, Adlenti felt sick. How long have they been doing this? Since the first day of contact, probably. Maybe even before that. They've been preparing for this campaign for years. The full scale of the deception was becoming clear. The Zephyrians hadn't just framed humanity for one attack. They had created an entire false narrative about human nature and intentions. As Helen looked out her window at the Earth below, she realized they were fighting more than just a military war. They were fighting for the truth itself. And so far, they were losing. Commander Kate Sullivan crouched behind a fallen metal beam, watching the Zephyrian patrol move through the ruins of New Boston Colony. Her team of 12 humans had been hiding on this moon for 3 weeks, living off scraps and planning their next strike. 2 guards by the supply depot, whispered Sergeant Mike Collins through her earpiece. Same as yesterday. Kate nodded. The Zephyrians were efficient but predictable. They followed the same patterns, used the same tactics that had worked against 46 other species. But humans were different. She hand-signaled to her team. They moved like shadows through the wreckage, each person knowing exactly what to do without being told. In 15 minutes, the supply depot was empty and the guards were unconscious. The humans vanished back into the ruins before anyone noticed. This was the new reality. Earth's military couldn't fight the massive alien fleets in open space, but they could make the occupation as painful as possible for the Zephyrians. Back on Earth, engineer Tony Rodriguez worked in a hidden laboratory deep underground. The surface cities were under constant surveillance now, with Zephyrian ships, monitoring every transmission and movement. "The quantum field generators are working," Tony told Dr. Blake over a secure connection. "We can make our ships invisible to their sensors for about 20 minutes at a time." Blake looked tired. He had been working for months with almost no sleep, trying to find ways to fight back against superior technology. 20 minutes isn't much. "It's enough," Tony replied. "Hit-and-run tactics. Strike fast and disappear before they know what happened." The first test came a week later. A small human ship, modified with Tony's stealth system, approached a Zephyrian supply convoy. The aliens never saw it coming. By the time their sensors detected the attack, 3 transport ships were disabled, and the human vessel was gone. The Zephyrians responded by increasing their patrols, but that just gave the humans more targets. Every convoy they sent out became a risk. Every supply depot became a potential target. On the diplomatic front, Sam Parker had been working quietly with the few alien species willing to listen. The Veltar had introduced him to others who had doubts about the official story. "We cannot act openly," explained Ambassador Threnki of the crystalline Silmari. "The Zephyrians control too much of the galactic economy. To oppose them would mean economic ruin." Sam understood, but it was frustrating. Fear kept potential allies silent, while humanity fought alone. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Blake had been studying captured Zephyrian technology when he noticed something strange in their computer systems. "They keep detailed records of everything," Blake explained to Admiral Hayes during a secure meeting. "Not just the military operations, but the entire history of their conquests. It's all here, going back thousands of years." Hayes leaned forward. "Everything?" "Everything. The species they've destroyed, the methods they used, even recordings of their planning sessions. They're incredibly organized." "Why would they keep evidence of their crimes?" Blake smiled grimly. "Because they never expected anyone to survive long enough to find it. Every other species they've conquered was completely destroyed within a few years. They keep the records for their own reference to improve their techniques." This was the key. If they could access the main Zephyrian archives, they would have proof of 46 genocide campaigns, evidence that no one in the galaxy could ignore. But the archives were on Zephyr Prime, the Empire's most heavily defended world. Getting there would be nearly impossible, and getting back would be even harder. Meanwhile, Commander Sullivan's guerrilla campaign was having an effect. The Zephyrians had expected to occupy human worlds with minimal resistance. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to surrender. "They don't fight like the others," reported Sub-Commander Kithal to his superior. The other species either fought conventionally and lost, or surrendered immediately. "These humans use tactics we have never encountered." High Commander Vextel studied the reports with growing concern. The human resistance was supposed to have been crushed months ago. Instead, it was growing stronger. "Increase the pressure," Vextal ordered. "Begin Phase 2 operations against their civilian populations. That always breaks their spirit." But Phase 2 didn't work either. When the Zephyrians bombed human cities, the survivors didn't surrender. They got angry. More people joined the resistance, and the attacks became more frequent and more coordinated. Captain Jake Morrison, who had been leading reconnaissance missions in captured Zephyrian space, made contact with some of the enslaved populations. What he found shocked him. "They're not really allies," Jake reported to Admiral Hayes. "Most of these species are prisoners. The Zephyrians conquered them, then forced them to serve in their military. Can we turn them against their masters? Maybe, but it would have to be done carefully. The Zephyrians have hostages, entire worlds full of civilians who would be killed if their people rebel." The complexity of the situation was becoming clear. The Zephyrian Empire wasn't just a military force. It was a system of control that had been perfected over thousands of years, but humans had advantages the other species hadn't possessed. They were naturally suspicious and independent. They didn't trust authority easily, even their own, and they were incredibly adaptable. Tony Rodriguez had been working on new weapons based on human understanding of physics. The Zephyrians used energy-based systems that followed predictable patterns. Human weapons were chaotic and unpredictable. "Kinetic projectiles," Tony explained to a group of military engineers. "Old-fashioned bullets and missiles. Their shields are designed to stop energy weapons, but a chunk of metal moving at high speed goes right through." It was primitive compared to alien technology, but it worked. Human fighters started mounting old-style machine guns and missile launchers alongside their advanced systems. The psychological effect was as important as the physical damage. The Zephyrians had grown used to fighting enemies who used familiar technologies. Human weapons behaved in ways their computers couldn't predict. Dr. Blake made another important discovery while studying Zephyrian communication networks. "They have a weakness," he announced during a strategy meeting. "Their entire command structure depends on real-time communication with their home world." "What does that mean?" asked Admiral Hayes. "It means they can't make independent decisions. Every major choice has to be approved by High Command on Zephyr Prime. If we could disrupt their communications, their fleets would be paralyzed," Hayes finished. "How do we do it?" Blake smiled. "The same way we're fighting everything else. We improvise." The plan was audacious even by human standards. A small team would infiltrate the main Zephyrian communication relay station and plant a virus in their network. The virus would be disguised as routine maintenance data, spreading throughout their system before anyone noticed. Commander Sullivan volunteered to lead the mission. Her team had become experts at impossible operations, and this was right in their specialty. The relay station was on an asteroid deep in Zephyrian space. Getting there required stolen alien ships and forged identification codes. The margin for error was 0. But humans had one more advantage the Zephyrians hadn't counted on. When the mission went wrong, as everyone knew it might, the humans didn't panic. They adapted. Sullivan's team found themselves trapped in the station with Zephyrian security forces closing in. Instead of trying to escape, they decided to make their stand worthwhile. "If we're going down," Sullivan told her team, "let's take their whole network with us." Instead of planting one small virus, they uploaded everything. Every piece of malicious code Tony Rodriguez had designed. Every disruptive program Blake had created. All of it dumped into the Zephyrian communication system at once. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Across the Empire, ships lost contact with their commanders. Supply convoys didn't receive their orders. Military units found themselves cut off and confused. For the first time in the war, the Zephyrians were the ones reacting instead of acting. And humans were very good at taking advantage of confusion. Admiral Hayes launched the largest offensive humanity had ever attempted. With the Zephyrian command structure disrupted, human forces struck at targets throughout their territory. But the real victory wasn't military. It was what Dr. Blake found in the captured data. "We have it all," Blake announced. "The complete archives. Every species they've destroyed, every lie they've told, every crime they've committed. And now the whole galaxy is going to see it." The huge meeting hall buzzed with voices from dozens of alien races. Elena Rodriguez stood at the speaking platform, her hands gripping the metal edges as she looked out at the crowd. The universal translator made every word clear, but she could hear the tone behind them. Mockery. Disbelief. Laughter. "These are your warships?" The crystal-faced Zephyrian delegate pointed at the holographic display floating above the center of the room. The images showed Earth's fleet in all its battered glory. Ships with rust streaks running down their hulls, armor plates that didn't match, welded on wherever they would fit, weapons that looked like they belonged in a museum. Jake Morrison shifted in his seat, uncomfortable under the stares of 100 different species. His ship, the UES Liberty, was 200 years old. Every battle scar told a story. Every patch of mismatched metal represented another fight his crew had survived. The hull had been repaired so many times that finding original Earth steel was nearly impossible. "Honored council members," the four-armed Corvani general waved dismissively at the display. "Perhaps humanity should focus on moving civilians to safety rather than fighting. These old ships would be destroyed before they could fire a single shot." Laughter rolled through the chamber like a wave. The other species had brought their finest vessels. The Etherians showed off ships that looked like floating crystals, surrounded by energy shields that could stop anything. The Titan Collective had massive dreadnoughts with armor thick enough to fly through a star. The Nexari brought sleek fighters that could move faster than light itself. All of them represented the best their civilizations could build. All of them made humanity's fleet look like floating junk. Lisa Parker sat next to Morrison, her jaw clenched tight. Her ship, the UES Defiance, was even older than the Liberty. 3 generations of her family had served on its bridge. Her grandfather had commanded it during the Proxima Wars. Her father had taken it through the belt conflicts. Now it was her turn to sit in the captain's chair. "Ambassador," she whispered to Elena. "We should tell them about the modifications." Elena shook her head slightly. "Not yet, Lisa. Let them think we're weak." The Supreme Chancellor, a being of pure energy contained in a glowing suit, raised one hand for silence. The chamber fell, quiet instantly. "The human fleet will serve as support vessels, supply runs, moving refugees, communication relays. Leave the real fighting to those who have the proper equipment." The session ended with more laughter. As the aliens filed out, still chuckling about humanity's rust buckets, the human delegation gathered in the corridor outside. Captain Danny Hayes joined them, his scarred face showing decades of combat experience. His ship, the UES Retribution, bore more battle damage than any vessel in the human fleet. "They think we're flying scrap metal," he said. "Good," Elena replied, her diplomatic smile never changing. "When this war starts, they'll learn why we keep our old ships running. They'll learn what happens when you laugh at people who turned staying alive into an art form." Morrison looked at his fellow captains. Each one commanded a ship that other races considered worthless. Each one had fought battles that would have sent the pretty new vessels running. "How long do we have before the enemy arrives?" 3 months, Elena said. "Maybe less." The human captains nodded. 3 months to prepare for a war against something called the Devourer Swarm, an enemy that consumed everything in its path. Planets. Stars, entire civilizations disappeared into its hunger. "What do we know about them?" Lisa asked. Dr. Alan Roberts, the scientific advisor, pulled up his data pad. "They're biomechanical. Part living creature, part machine. Each one is about the size of a cruiser. They move in swarms of millions. They eat everything, metal, energy, even space itself." "Weaknesses?" Danny asked. "Unknown. Every civilization they've encountered has been completely destroyed. No survivors, no records, just empty space where worlds used to be." The group walked toward the docking bays where their ships waited. To any alien observer, they looked like a collection of museum pieces. Rust-stained hulls held together with hope and stubbornness. Weapon systems that belonged in history books. Crews that other species considered barely civilized. Morrison stopped at an observation window that looked out at the massive space station's docking rings. Hundreds of ships from dozens of races filled the berths. Beautiful vessels with smooth lines and perfect finishes. Ships that looked like works of art rather than tools of war. "You know what I see when I look at those ships?" he asked the others. "What?" Lisa replied. "I see ships that have never been in a real fight. Ships built by people who think war is clean and organized. Ships made by species that have never had to choose between dying and winning." Elena joined them at the window. "The council thinks we're primitives playing with antiques. They don't understand that these ships weren't built to look pretty. They were built to keep fighting when everything else has given up." As they watched, a sleek Etherian cruiser glided past the window. Its crystalline hull caught the light from the station's artificial suns, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the walls. It was beautiful. It was perfect. It would be dead within a week. "Admiral Blake is waiting for us," Elena said, checking her chronometer. "We need to discuss the real plan." They made their way to the secure briefing room where Admiral Susan Blake waited. She was a small woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. When the door sealed behind them, she activated the room's privacy shields. "Gentlemen, ladies, what you're about to hear cannot leave this room. The other species don't know, and they cannot know until it's too late to stop us." She activated a holographic display that showed technical specifications for human ships. But these weren't the rust buckets the aliens had laughed at. These were detailed schematics of weapon systems that violated half the known laws of physics. For 200 years, while other species built beautiful ships for civilized warfare, we built something else entirely. We built weapons that could win wars against enemies that shouldn't exist. We built ships that could survive things that would drive other races insane. The display showed the Liberty's real configuration. Hidden beneath the rust and patches were weapon systems that could crack planets. The Defiance carried devices that could reach through dimensions and grab enemies that thought they were safe. The Retribution housed a collapsed star in its core, barely contained by technology that other species considered impossible. "Why the disguise?" Lisa asked. "Because if they knew what we really built, they would have destroyed us long ago. Every species in this galaxy would have united against us. They're not ready to know what humanity is capable of when our backs are against the wall." Morrison studied the schematics of his own ship. The Liberty looked like a rust bucket from the outside, but inside it carried enough firepower to sterilize. A solar system. "When do we reveal ourselves?" "When the Devourers arrive and the pretty ships start dying," Blake replied. "When the other species realize that all their advanced technology and civilized warfare means nothing against an enemy that wants to eat the universe." Elena looked at the group of captains. Each one commanded a ship that could destroy civilizations. Each one had been trained to fight wars against enemies that existed outside normal space and time. They laughed at our old fleet today. "Yes," Blake said with a cold smile, "but they won't be laughing for much longer. When the swarm arrives, they'll learn why humanity keeps the old ships. They'll learn why we never throw anything away. They'll learn what happens when you force people who survived the impossible to fight one more time." The meeting ended with plans for the coming battle. As the captains returned to their ships, they carried with them the knowledge that everything was about to change. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their willingness to become monsters to protect what they loved. The Devourer swarm was coming, and humanity's old fleet was ready to show the stars what real terror looked like. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the vast archive chamber on Kepler Station, a captured Zephyrian facility deep in enemy space. Around him, holographic displays showed thousands of files, each one representing a destroyed civilization. "This is it," whispered Dr. Aaron Blake as he worked at the main computer terminal. 46 species, all eliminated using the same pattern. First contact, false friendship, manufactured incidents, then systematic extermination. Lisa Bennett, now promoted. To Communications Director, watch the data flow across her screens. Each file contained detailed records. Planetary populations before and after Zephyrian intervention, psychological profiles of target species, even recorded conversations between Zephyrian commanders discussing their methods. The Cathari civilization, Blake read from one file. Population 12 billion, known for their artistic achievements and peaceful nature. Status after liberation, 0 survivors. All cultural artifacts destroyed to prevent future resistance movements. Jake felt sick. As he read more entries, the Zephyrians had been methodical in their genocide, not just killing populations, but erasing every trace of their existence. Here's the Haven Prime attack, Lisa said, pulling up a video file. It's all here. The planning meetings, the construction of fake human ships, even rehearsals of the attack. On the screen, Zephyrian officers discussed how to make the massacre look convincing. They talked about humans like scientists discussing lab rats, calculating exactly how much horror was needed to turn the galaxy against Earth. We need to get this information out immediately, Jake said. The communication jamming is still in effect throughout most of the galaxy, Lisa replied. The Zephyrians have been very careful to control the information flow. Blake looked up from his work. Then we don't rely on their systems. We use our own. Over the next several hours, they worked frantically to copy the entire archive. Terabytes of data, spanning thousands of years of systematic murder and deception. Everything the Zephyrians had done, documented in their own words. Meanwhile, Tony Rodriguez had been working on a new project back on Earth. If normal communication channels were blocked, he would create new ones. Quantum broadcast transmitters. Tony explained to Admiral Hayes, instead of sending signals through space, we send them directly through subspace. No way to jam them. How long do we have before the Zephyrians realize what we're doing? Not long, maybe 6 hours before they trace the transmission source. It would have to be enough. Earth's remaining ships moved into position around the solar system, ready to defend the broadcast station at all costs. The transmission began at 800 Earth Standard Time. Every inhabited world in the galaxy received the same signal simultaneously. There was no way to block it, no way to filter it. For the first time in months, the truth reached every corner of known space. The reaction was immediate and explosive. On the water world of Veltar, Ambassador Kethlan watched the archive footage with growing horror. The species he had believed were naturally aggressive had actually been peaceful before their encounters with the Zephyrians. "How many?" he whispered to his aide. "How many civilizations have we helped them destroy?" The crystalline beings of Silmar saw recordings of their own first contact with the Empire, along with Zephyrian plans to eventually eliminate them once their mineral-rich worlds had been strip-mined. On hundreds of worlds throughout Zephyrian, space, enslaved populations watched footage of their ancestors' real final days. Not the heroic last stands of violent aggressors that they had been taught about, but desperate civilians trying to protect their children from systematic extermination. High Commander Vextall stood in his command center on Zephyr Prime, watching. His carefully constructed empire begin to crumble. Emergency reports flooded in from every sector. Rebellions were breaking out on a dozen worlds. Allied species were demanding explanations. Some were already withdrawing their support. "Shut down all communication networks," Vextall ordered. "Initiate information blackout protocols." But it was too late. The truth was spreading faster than their ability to contain it. Worse, the humans had been clever about their timing. The broadcast had been coordinated with military strikes against Zephyrian communication hubs, preventing them from mounting an effective counter-narrative. Captain Morrison was still on Kepler Station when the first Allied ships arrived. Not Zephyrian allies, but species that had seen the evidence and decided to act on it. "Human vessel, this is Commander Thaisara of the Veltar Defense Force," came the transmission. "We offer our assistance in preserving these archives." More ships followed over the next few hours. The small Zephyrian garrison at Kepler Station found themselves facing a growing fleet of angry aliens who had discovered they had been manipulated for centuries. On Earth, Ambassador Helen Carter found herself in a very different position than she had been in just days before. Instead of desperately trying to convince anyone to listen to humanity's side of the story, she was fielding communications from dozens of species offering to help. The Corvani Republic formally apologizes for our participation in the blockade of your worlds, announced Fleet Commander Susthak. We were deceived about your true nature. Similar messages came from the other species that had attacked human colonies. Some offered medical aid for the survivors, others provided military support. A few even offered to help rebuild the destroyed settlements. But the most important support came from within Zephyrian space itself. The enslaved populations that had been forced to crew Zephyrian ships began to mutiny. Entire fleets switched sides overnight when their crews realized they had been fighting for the species that had murdered their ancestors. Dr. Blake, working with xenoarchaeologists from a dozen species, continued to uncover the full scope of Zephyrian crimes. The archives contained not just military records, but cultural studies, psychological profiles, and detailed analyses of each target species. They were learning, Blake realized as he studied the data. Each conquest taught them something new about how to manipulate and destroy civilizations. We weren't just their latest victims. We were their ultimate test. The Zephyrians had studied every species they encountered, cataloging their weaknesses and strengths. Humans had been chosen specifically because they represented the greatest challenge. If the Zephyrians could conquer humanity using their refined techniques, they would be unstoppable. But the plan had backfired spectacularly. Human stubbornness and refusal to surrender had given other species time to see through the deception. Admiral Hayes coordinated the growing alliance from his command ship, the UES Defiance. What had started as humanity's desperate last stand was becoming the largest military coalition in galactic history. Zephyrian forces are retreating from the outer systems, reported Captain Davis. Their enslaved crews are deserting faster than they can be replaced. What about their main fleet? Still concentrated around Zephyr Prime. They're not giving up without a fight. Hayes nodded. He hadn't expected the Zephyrians to surrender peacefully. They had too much to lose, and they knew that defeat would mean facing justice for thousands of years of genocide. The final phase of the war was beginning. The Alliance fleet was massive, but the Zephyrians still controlled their home system, with all its defenses and weapons. The battle for Zephyr Prime would determine the fate of the galaxy. But first, they had one more revelation to deal with. Dr. Blake had found something in the deepest archives that changed everything they thought they knew about the Zephyrian Empire. The current leadership isn't the original Zephyrian species, Blake announced during a joint command meeting. The real Zephyrians were conquered and replaced over 8,000 years ago. Jake stared at the data Blake was displaying. What do you mean? The beings we've been fighting are called the Vekthar. They destroyed the Zephyrian civilization and took their identity, along with their technology and their territory. Everything they've done since then has been building toward a single goal, which is, Blake's expression was grim, total galactic sterilization. They don't want to rule the galaxy. They want to empty it of all life except themselves. The true scope of the threat was finally clear. The Vekthar hadn't been conquering species to enslave them. They had been systematically eliminating all potential competition, working their way through the galaxy one civilization at a time. Humanity hadn't just been their latest target. They had been the last significant obstacle to the Vekthar's final solution. The Vekthar Empire was gone, its leaders facing justice for their crimes, its territory transformed into a confederation of free worlds. Where once there had been rigid control and systematic oppression, there was now diversity, creativity, and hope. On Earth, monuments were built to honor those who had died in the conflict. But the greatest monument was the galaxy itself. transformed from a place of fear and deception into something that resembled humanity's oldest dream of what civilization could become. Jake Morrison stood in his office on the orbital station that served as the new Galactic Council headquarters, looking out at the stars. Ships from 100 different species moved peacefully through space, trading goods and ideas instead of weapons and threats. It had taken a war to achieve peace, and the cost had been enormous. But as Morrison watched the diverse fleet of vessels working to get